what you're worried about there is liability protection. And so when you create an entity, the LLC is definitely the most commonly used these days. The idea with an entity is that they can only get what you put into the entity. The new law, they're saying that the information that business owners put into their system is not just going to be publicly available. If you're looking at buying business, I mean, the first question is, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah.
Right. And so, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. You're usually looking at
Gabe Tucker, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here.
You're my brother-in-law, and you are in the world of law as an attorney here locally. You've helped me out with some business stuff. You mostly business law, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So I wanted to have you on today so we could really talk about, you're not real estate specific, but you've done some real estate stuff, and there's a lot of stuff around being an entrepreneur and owning your own business in the real estate world and investing and flipping that obviously lawyers are involved with in contracts and LLCs. So I wanted to get into that a little bit so you can officially set the record straight on what's necessary, what's not, why you need an attorney, do you need an attorney? Before we dive into all that though, who are you? Where'd you come from?
Yeah.
Why'd you get into law? Give us a background.
Yeah. So, I usually start out by telling people that I grew up as a military brat. So my dad was in the Navy for the first 22, 23 years of my life. So I grew up really moving around quite a bit. I was born in California. We lived overseas 2 times, and really from East Coast to West Coast in the U.S., but ended up going to college in Georgia where I met Hannah, your sister, and then came here for law school. And, I always, really since I can remember, always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. When you're...
Is it because you watch Suits? And
yeah, I actually didn't get on the Suits train until everyone else did recently.
Yeah.
The show's kind of come back alive.
Yeah.
But, there are a bunch of lawyer movies out there. So my dad was a big Tom Cruise fan. So, A Few Good Men and those types of things.
Yeah.
And, when you're watching those movies, a lot of them center around criminal law. And so the high school that I went to actually had a legal studies academy.
Oh, cool.
That I participated in. And, it was really mostly focused around criminal law. There were classes that you would take that was like forensic science and criminal psychology and stuff like that. Very different than what law school actually is. But it's just always what piques my interest. I like the idea of being an attorney. And so that's what I've just always sought out to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And they came out of Cumberland Law School, number 1 in your class, right?
I was up there.
Up there?
I was
okay.
3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then you're with Fortis, right?
That's
right?
Yeah.
So what type of law does the company do, and then you do specifically inside there?
Yeah. So Fortis, we do a lot of different types of things. It's a pretty unique law firm in that we're considered boutique just because of our size. We have 9 attorneys. It's unique in that everyone there is a partner. So from day one, we're all involved with actually running the business. In law school, you learn a lot about case law and how to read and how to analyze facts with the law, but they don't teach you how to actually be a lawyer and how to actually run a business.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole side of it that really in my first 2-3 years of being a full-time practicing attorney that I've been able to see firsthand and be a part of strategic decisions about different types of work that we're getting into, who we're hiring, and all those things. But when the firm was started, it was started by a guy who worked at a larger firm in town, a regional law firm. And when he started it, the firm mainly did what we call economic and community development work. So that really involved a lot of nonprofit representation and then a lot of representation of companies who might be moving to the state looking for tax incentives. It involved policy work for those types of tax incentive deals and the legislation involved. And, it's really grown into be almost what I would consider a full service law firm. We handle any type of business transaction. We have a litigator now. So, we like to say that we try and help as much as we can. And, certainly if there's something that we can't do, we bring someone else in. But I specifically really focus on the corporate transactional side of things.
Okay. I never thought of that. I see it a lot in the medical world with Hannah being in it, Rachel being in it, but even doctors and clients of, hey, I went through years and years and years of schooling. I know every medicine there is, but I've never had a finance class or never had a business class on how to run a business. I've never thought about that in the lawyer world as well. Like, because you really are, there's a lot of independent attorneys working for themselves. Like, they've got to run a business. Yeah. It's not just knowing how to research and everything else. But
I think the statistic in Alabama that I've heard is that, this is crazy, it's that for every lawyer who works at a firm with more than one person, there is a lawyer who is working alone. So there are a lot of lawyers in Alabama who are just solo practitioners. Smaller towns, that's definitely more common. But there's a huge side of it that's running a business. And at a lot of the larger law firms, where there's a traditional associate to partner track, when you come in as an associate, you're really just doing the work. And that's great. That's what you're there to do. But, my mentor who started Fortive, he said that at those firms, once you become a partner, then they just kind of expect you to know how to do business development and those types of things. And so, he really sees value in everyone coming in and having ownership from the beginning. And, you really reap what you sow as far as, what you can earn and the benefits that you can receive.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just kind of skipping that or not skipping the first part because you're still doing all the work, but also adding on to, hey, let's learn this from day one, because why wait to have you learn that stuff, or not even learn it, just dive right in.
So, I, from the very start, you are thinking about business development and, how do you want to market yourself? What do you tell people that you do? You're in the client meetings, you're on the calls. So very outward facing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's hone in a little bit. So you've helped me on some LLC creation, on some new ventures that I've done. And that's one of the biggest questions I get from investor clients from my realtor side of business, wanting to buy their first investment property or maybe buying their second or third, is all the forums say I need an LLC. All of the attorneys on the forum say definitely get one, if not two or three. All the CPAs say don't get one because it's more work for me. What's right there?
Yeah. So, when looking at buying a property, let's say, you're probably doing that because you're going to develop it in some way, or there might be something already existing that you're going to rent out. And so what you're worried about there is liability protection. And so when you create an entity, the LLC is definitely the most commonly used these days. You're really trying to separate your own personal assets, the money that you've worked really hard to save up over time, from any liabilities that could come from owning that property. So if you have a tenant and something crazy happens and they were to sue you, the idea with an entity is that they can only get what you've put into the entity. They can't come and reach into your personal assets. So, that's why, as an attorney, we would highly recommend doing a rental property in an entity. The other thing with it is, and you mentioned the accountant piece, there are tax considerations that go into it. A lot of LLCs are likely going to be just taxed as a partnership if you have multiple people. So it's always important to have a good tax advisor at the table. And, the point about lawyers wanting there to be a lot of LLCs, that's definitely true. And it's a funny joke amongst us and the accountants. But the liability protection is really the biggest thing.
And that wouldn't just be from a rental standpoint, but that liability still exists if you're buying to flip or developing,
Definitely.
just any kind of business activity, really, in and outside of real estate.
Right. Yeah. And, with the entity, what's important there is that you maintain what's called the corporate form. There is a concept called piercing the corporate veil. And so if you do create an entity and you don't follow what courts have said are proper corporate form, then you do risk your personal assets being at stake. And so when you create an entity, it's important that you do things like make a separate bank account. You're not commingling funds, stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know one of the things I think with my dad's on some of the rental properties that we own, and we have an LLC inside that, and we have meetings once a quarter, once a year, whenever we do that, and that's part of the of those things, right?
Yeah, you want to have meetings, you want to
have notes from it,
put things in writing, you want to keep minutes. Anytime that you're pulling money out or putting money in, you want to document all of that to show that the entity is actually something separate from me personally.
Yeah. I guess kind of setting up for worst case. If you got to go to court, how can you prove that you did everything correctly?
Exactly.
First not. What's up with Delaware? Why does my LLC need to be in Delaware?
Yeah. So early on, Delaware got this reputation as being the place to go to form an entity. And so, just because you live in Alabama, say, that does not mean that you can only create an entity in Alabama. You can do it in any state. And so a lot of people do Delaware. Whether or not that is really worth it these days depends on a lot of different circumstances. I mean, we represent a lot of startup companies, who like tech companies, stuff like that. And in order for them to grow, they need to go get money from like venture capital firms. And a lot of those venture capital firms will not invest in you unless you're set up as a Delaware corporation. And the reason for that is that Delaware is known to have more sophisticated courts. They actually have their own court system that is devoted to business cases. And so there's just more built out case law, in Alabama and in the area of Alabama that we live. There might not be as sophisticated of judges or case law out there for businesses. So venture capital investors who are putting a lot of money on the table, they want certainty. And doing it in Delaware in their minds is a way for there to be certainty.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little less risk because there's more proof.
Right. And, their lawyers know Delaware law, and it's just what they're comfortable with.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is Delaware the only state that has that separate court system for business?
Yeah. And so, that's one of the reasons why is that separate court system. In the news recently with Elon Musk, you and I were talking about this before starting the podcast. He has come out and said he's going to move the incorporation of his entity to Texas because Delaware just slapped a pretty large judgment on him and told him that the salary that he got paid last year was too high. It was like $50 billion in stock or something like that, something crazy. And so, as an investor, if you're investing in a company, that's a good example of, hey, you have a court in Delaware that really knows what it's doing, and there the court is protecting the shareholders of Tesla, right? Saying that the shareholders are losing out here because the CEO has paid himself this huge salary. But moving to Texas, I mean, we'll see if he actually does it.
So in his case, if you're an investor looking to invest in an LLC, you say, hey, I love that ruling. I'm so good with Delaware LLCs. But if you're a CEO or a business owner that may eventually grow to the point of syndicating, raising money, you may follow him to go somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe so. And, there are other states out there that have some reputations for being good places to incorporate. Wyoming is one that people think have good privacy protection. All of this really is kind of being level set by, there's a new law called the Corporate Transparency Act that has gone into effect. And I think that it really is going to kind of call into question whether or not it's better to go and form a company in a certain state it is requiring really all for-profit entities to disclose who their owners are through the U.S. Department of Treasury. And so I think that it's one of the largest developments in corporate law since the invention of the LLC, which happened in like the 90s.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal. So, if you're an Alabama resident and you're just creating an LLC to own a rental property and you're not needing to go out and raise money, incorporating in Alabama is perfectly fine.
So I was going to ask you, with the new law, it may affect this a good bit, but I've heard that to go to Delaware, then you can hide who you are owning the LLC. So maybe I don't want my tenants to know who I am. They can't look me up.
Sure.
But is that new law scrapping that now?
So the new law, they're saying that the information that business owners put into their system is not just going to be publicly available.
Okay.
There are ways, even if you're incorporated in Delaware, for people to find out, who you are. All of these documents are publicly available. You can go, you just have to pay a fee. It might not immediately show up when you search the company, but there are ways for people to find out.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times you'll have a registered agent, and then that's the only kind of quote unquote person file if you're looking on like Secretary of State, like business entity lookups or something.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of people like hire a registered agent, so they don't have to put their own name on the document.
Yeah, and I've done that I had an LLC a couple of years ago with two other partners, and we, I wasn't the big driver just because of my lack of knowledge around it, but one of them was like, we got to go through Delaware, and had a registered agent, did the whole thing, and I was like, that's fine. Like you set it up, you know, and the deal worked out and it was fine. But I remember doing that, and we paid someone to be a registered agent. It was like, it was a company. That's what the company
that's
does.
what they do.
Like, that's the whole thing. Like, we will be your registered agent for a fee.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, switching gears a little bit. So I want to talk about just corporate business in general. So you get really, I'm interested in the insight that you get on these businesses, because I love the idea of eventually buying a business that probably reflects and correlates, vertically integrates within real estate and what I do, and just, just grow what I do. And so you get to look at business transactions all the time. What are some unique and different things that you see and components to be thinking about as maybe a potential buyer sometime, or just some of the cool stories in that world?
Yeah. So, if you're looking at buying business, the first question is, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah.
Right. And so, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. You're usually looking at equity or debt. A lot of times people will split it maybe 50-50. There's also, I know you look into this a lot, but seller financing is a good way to go. That's a form of debt, but doesn't involve having to go to a bank. Mm-hmm. So there are ways that you can get creative with how you're actually getting the financing. And, bringing up the LLC, one of the reasons why people like LLCs is that they're really flexible. So before LLCs really got popular, most things were done through a traditional partnership or through a corporation. And corporations have a lot of formalities that you have to follow that's managed by a board of directors who elect officers, and then you have shareholders who actually own the company, who are separate sometimes from the board of directors and from the officers. And in order for the company to do anything, you have to go through this whole process. And so what an LLC really allows you to do is bring in money from, let's say we're talking equity, bring in money from some people who want to invest in your business, and you can structure the LLC documents in a way where Blake, if you're the one who is really putting this project on and going to be handling day-to-day activities, you're managing everything. You don't have a board. You don't really have anyone who you have to answer to. And you're making all the decisions, and your structure with the investors might be, based off some waterfall where they get they're the first in line when there's positive cash flow that you're paying out, and they get a certain percentage return after that. And then, once they hit that percentage return, then the way the money is distributed gets changed to where maybe you're getting a larger percentage as the person doing most of the work. So there are a lot of different ways that things can be structured, and just bringing up the LLC again It's a really flexible tool that, people use every day, and you can really make those documents say whatever you want them to say.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you stay within the parameters of the law, so you keep that protection.
Right. Yeah. There are certain things that by statute are prohibited and like you can't contract around, but most things with the LLC you can contract around. Even if the law says, one thing is supposed to happen, you can write something else.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, I'm curious if this is true. I've heard when you're dealing with businesses that are selling under like 5 million and under, it's a lot of mom and pop businesses. It's not the massive corporations and a lot of maybe not structure, but employees. It's just kind of a smaller business.
Right.
Usually you see more seller financing deals is that true?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
In that space?
Yeah. Yeah. And debt. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably not in those situations going to have a big capital raise where you have equity investors coming to the table.
Right.
You probably found a local bank who's willing to give you a loan. You've shown them, the numbers. You're seeing what monthly financial statements look like, and it's just math for the bank, right?
Yeah.
So, they might finance part of it through a loan. They might do part of it seller financing. They might do all of it seller financing, all of it through loan. I mean, it just depends, but you're rarely seeing true equity investments at that level. Yeah.
At what price point do you really see raises?
It definitely varies. But I would say that when you're kind of north of 5 or 10, when you start looking at, okay, we need to go out and actually find a firm that is in the business of investing in companies like this.
So are those investors usually like entities that just pick like, hey, we invest in the energy, whatever, or engineering? It's not, hey, let me go call my friends and family and get $50,000 chunks at a time. It's more, or what do you?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends. Friends and family is a good way that a lot of people kind of raise initial money. But as you grow, and if you're trying to get to kind of a next level of operations to where you need just an infusion of cash that's not coming in, as revenue, but once you do infuse that cash and grow the company, the revenue is going to come down the line. Those types of investors, you might have some that will just, if it's a good deal, they'll do it. You might have some that are really industry focused. A lot of them are what I would say like market focused. So they might be focused on a smaller sized market. So a smaller city or a mid-sized market. Birmingham would be considered a mid-sized market. So you have some like venture capital or private equity firms out there who are looking at acquiring businesses, and they're focused on a certain size city, because that's probably going to mean a certain sized company that they're comfortable with coming in and taking over and trying to build.
And with those investments, are there certain parameters that are tied with those funds from a legal standpoint? And this question comes from, if I borrow money from an individual that's going to fund a deal for me, my understanding was I'd have to give them a competitive or comparable interest rate back. Like I can't just make it up, but it is fairly flexible. So does that question make sense? Like if I'm borrowing from a fund, can we create any terms between us that we both agree to, or are there parameters we have to stay within?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever they'll say yes to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ultimately their capital, and they have something that they're going to be comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's, especially in kind of the startup world, a lot of it is investor driven. The terms are, if you're going to raise money, you're going to probably go out and find a lead investor, and you're going to take mostly the terms that they're providing. And then anyone else who you're getting after that, who might be coming in at smaller amounts, you're only going to take the money if they agree to the terms that lead investor has provided. But the lead investor, I mean, it's really whatever you and them come up with.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So it's about your saleability.
Yeah.
On
absolutely.
how you can go.
Yeah.
Pitch it, I guess.
You have
right?
to pitch it. And you have to get them excited.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sales skill.
Yeah. That's wild. You're selling money. You're selling an opportunity, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're selling hopefully, potential future income.
Yeah.
And these firms have a certain, multiple that they're looking to make. So there are some they're only going to invest if they think they can get 3 times what they put in or 5 times what they put in.
Yeah. Well, what would you say, this may be too broad of a question, but that 5 million and under range small business, what would you say like a normal trade value? Do they go off like revenue multiplier, EBITDA multiplier? Like what, do you see any kind of commonalities on how they trade?
Yeah, EBITDA is the most common, definitely. People just feel comfortable about what it represents. And, there are certain kind of industry standard multiples involved. So, let's say the restaurant industry is commonly 5 or 6x multiple. So the sales price is going to be 5 or 6 times whatever EBITDA is. You might have some industries that are 10x. And that really fluctuates with the economy. So when the economy was really hot in 2021, the startup scene and fundraising scene was crazy, and you had really high multiples because that's just what was happening.
Yeah.
You're seeing less of that now, and it hasn't totally fallen off. And in Birmingham, we still have pretty decent deal flow, but the multiple really can just depend on economic conditions.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of like a cap rate for commercial construction.
Sure.
It's similar, I guess, measuring stick. Okay, so let's talk about some creative deals that you've seen, I guess, without going into details that you can't talk about specifics of, but have you seen any creative, unique deals that you've gotten to be a part of as far as companies selling?
Yeah, like I said, a lot of them take different forms, some combination of debt, equity. Probably what I think is a unique opportunity for some founders or people who have started a business is if there's an organization that comes in and buys the company, and you can take a portion of the purchase price as equity in the buyer, and it's their goal to really flip the company and sell it for 10 times what they bought it from you, then you get kind of a second bite at the apple. And so you obviously aren't going to want to do that if your goal in selling is to retire and leave and not need to worry about it anymore, because if you stay on the cap table, you're going to have certain obligations that you have to meet. But as far as a lot of people, if they are wanting to sell, they might always have that, oh, what if I didn't sell question in their mind? Could I have continued to grow this? Or if I had waited 3 more years, could I have gotten more money for my company? But taking a part of the purchase price as what we call rollover equity can allow the founder to still have an opportunity to benefit from the company growing.
Yeah. Is there the other side of that, the risk side, that if it drops down, then the seller kind of loses out, or is the buyer still for that?
They're not. I mean, if you're taking a portion of the purchase price in the form of equity, then if the company tanks, then you're, I guess, losing out on that percentage of the purchase price that you could have received just in cash.
Yeah.
Probably the riskier side of things that we have seen comes in just the relationship side of it. You're staying on with someone who's coming in and taking your baby, taking your company, and they think, they're making changes, and they think that they can run it better than you. And so there can be tension there, and they might have some leverage over you just if you've stayed on as an employee, even as not just an employee but an advisor or a consultant. Just there are different things that you're going to have to be worrying about from a relationship standpoint than if you had just sold clean and walked away.
That's interesting. So if you were in the market to buy a business and you've got the knowledge and experience that you've got now, what industry would you tend to go to if you're looking for a combination of just profitability and the ease of work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In Birmingham right now, there is this pretty huge effort to grow the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a lot of focus on tech companies. What what are considered emerging growth companies. So, those are companies that are thinking about new ideas. They're inventing something. They're solving a problem that they've identified that hopefully no one else has identified. And so there's a large focus on that right now. And you kind of can fall into a mindset of thinking, well, I can only start a company and make a lot of money if I come up with something new. But I've also seen, more blue collar companies that are started that do like just as well as the tech startups. There might be a ceiling that a blue collar company will hit that a tech company could, just because of the nature of software, could fly through. But I am becoming more and more convinced that, in order to be successful in business, you do not need to come up with something new. You can go do something that people have been doing for hundreds of years and just figure out a more efficient way to do it well than someone else and just do it well. And there are people out there who would want to buy that.
Yeah. It's interesting, specific to the construction and real estate industry. I was talking to a CPA the other day, and he said, by far the most successful, most cash rich are HVAC companies, plumbing companies.
Yes.
Their margins are ridiculous.
Yeah. Landscaping.
That's high. And so looking at that, it's, going in and gosh, what it would take to go and start one of those from scratch is just hurts my brain.
Right.
But go in and find one that is 30 years old, that is kind of that baby boomer generation that implement tech into it and kind of take it up to the next level.
Yeah.
Update their marketing.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned the baby boomer generation. I mean, you see in the news a lot that we're approaching this unprecedented time where there's going to be a huge wealth transfer just because of the wealth that baby boomers have developed over time. I mean, it's the wealthiest generation ever. And they're about to start retiring and passing things on to their kids. And so I think there are a lot of those types of businesses out there that people are going to be looking to get out of. And, if you've worked hard for 30 years running a company, you don't necessarily want to just shut it down. You want to kind of have a legacy and see it keep continuing forward. So I think that in those types of companies that have been maybe operated by some people who are nearing retirement age now, there's just going to be a lot of opportunity to buy up those types of businesses.
Yeah. It's just putting yourself in a spot to be in line, right? Because where are those people going? If it's, $5 million and under, are there business brokers for that?
Right.
Is that where they're going to sell, or they don't have kids or family to pass it on to, or they just phasing it out? And so how can you be that person ready to take that on?
Yeah. And there are people out there who help those types of companies market themselves for a sale. There are groups out there that if you want to buy those types of companies, you can go to them and they'll help you identify those types of companies. It also can just be word of mouth, come through someone like an accountant or your lawyer. Just having a broad enough network and letting those people know that if those opportunities do present themselves, that you would want to hear about.
Staying top of mind. Yeah. There's one of the bigger flippers in Birmingham. Anytime I see him, I consider us friends. Anytime I see him, he goes, I need houses.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you got 20 house flips going right now. That's all he says. And that's just kind of staying in front, top of mind of hey, if I hear of something that could be a flip, I know he's looking because he's literally saying it every day.
Right.
So saying if I'm looking for, hey, I'm looking to buy a business that is $1 to $3 million, in the real estate industry, and just kind of keep that in front of people.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, cool. Well, before we wrap up, I want to get into some recommendations from you. So are you reading any books or any podcasts, business related or not, that just are really doing it for you that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah. So probably my favorite podcast, and this is super nerdy and lawyerly of me, but there's one called Advisory Opinions that I just love. It's a man and woman who have had great legal careers, and they just follow things in the legal world, and they really cover everything from big Supreme Court decisions to just other developments in law that might not involve a huge, monumental court decision. They're just in the weeds on all of it. And I listen to it just to stay on top of what the current, legal issues are. I mean, this stuff is always changing. It's always changing.
Big issues that we need to know about right now?
Well, the one that I mentioned earlier, the Corporate Transparency Act, is a big one for people who own businesses. If you don't comply with that, there are civil penalties and even criminal penalties. The civil penalties are, I think, $500 per day of not complying.
Wow. And
then if there's, some intent element, or if you willfully give them the wrong information, then there can be criminal penalties that's up to $10,000 in fines or 2 years in prison.
Wow.
So that for people who are involved in the business world, who have entities that they, operate through, getting in compliance with that new law is very, very important.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Cool. If people have more questions or details around that, they can reach out to you,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, law firms out there are all putting out their thought leadership on this. Absolutely. And it really is unprecedented. And I think there are still a lot of questions about how it's going to be enforced and all of that, just because so many people don't know about it. And it really could be, harmful to small business owners. And no one wants that. So, but yeah, absolutely. That's something that we can help out with.
Nice. Any business books or anything you're reading right now is jumps out to you?
No, not really. I wish I read more. I spend my whole day reading at work.
Yeah.
Most of my day is spent in contracts or researching. And so I'm looking at words a lot. So for my learning, I really lean on podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Any, you're a fairly new dad. Hannah are killing it with beautiful baby Ruth. So any dad podcasts or books that you've read that you're like, this is the one that's really done it for me?
So before Ruth was born, I started reading a book called Parenting by a guy named Paul David Tripp. And it's very good. I, unfortunately, because Ruth came a little early, I was not able to finish it before she was born. And then I've not picked it up since because I've been focused on, taking care of her. But I recently picked it back up to try and finish it. And it's just, it's faith-based and really just depicts parenting through the lens of the gospel and shows how, your kids are really no different than you. We all, have fallen to sin and we all want to put ourselves first. And in a kid, it just, kind of shows through in a different way.
Yeah.
But it's
unfortunately
really
the good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, that was a selfish question because I definitely need help on the parenting front. So I'll look into getting that book too.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, cool. Well, where can people find out more about you? Do you have website, social, anything?
Yeah. So our website is www.fortif.com. That's FORTIF. And all of our information is on there.
Cool. We'll link that in the show notes too so people can find you.
Cool.
Gabe, thanks for being here. This was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Until next time.